So welcome guys to the first Inomial billing proof of concept demonstration. So aiming to do two things in this really. First is just to, I guess, a lot of people haven't seen the Inomial billing platform. So to give you a view of the bits and pieces of it and just to acquaint you with what we're looking at. And then we'll run through a scenario 1 and 2 as defined by the POC. And we'll leave some time at the end for some questions. So we'll just jump to the next slide. So yeah, agenda. We'll look at the timeline of this POC and when we're going to demonstrate what. Then we'll look at the background of the POC document that we first received. Aim to that. Again, try to punch down a little bit. We'll jump into the Inomial platform and Brian will show you around the bits and pieces of the platform's capable of and typically the views for different users. So what your billing users might see a different view than your potentially your assurance type users. Then we'll jump straight into the scenarios. Scenarios 1 and 2 we'll do today, and like the order management one, I'll get some instructions after, so you can try it yourself as well. And we'll get some time for some Q&A. Okay, just the next slide, right? Yep. So timeline-wise, we started last Monday, and we spent the best part of a week trying to sort a lot of the data in so we can actually show something that's quite meaningful, and hopefully a lot of this will be quite relatable for people here today. So obviously we're at the second week, we're on day 6, and we'll do scenario 1 and 2. In a couple of days' time, on Wednesday, we'll do a scenario 4, which is the order management integration. And we'll also do a subset of scenario 3. So scenario 3 was largely around performance and things like that. And one of those metrics was for a billing run of 2 million subscriptions. Accounts.
We weren't sure, but we picked subscriptions. Yeah.
So we think that'll last. So we'll do a subset of those 2 million just to see demonstrate the process and some of the speeds that we do. In a production sense, Mark can talk this a bit later, but we'll do that. But there's a few options to actually pull down those speeds, and then depending on how and then similar to the last time, we'll do a final showcase. We'll try to collate scenarios 1, 2, 3, and 4 together in some meaningful demonstration, fit into an hour. Okay. Any questions around that timeline? Cool. So hopefully everyone's seen the PDF that we were provided. So we'll given a PDF with some success criteria and some scenarios in which to prove them. Really, this POC is helping you guys understand what the Inomial billing platform can do. So please feel free to ask any questions and anything else like that. So some of the success criteria we took out of it. So be able to have some flexible billing options, so pro rata or by billing period, once off and reoccurring plans, any advanced charging and anything like that. Usage monitoring and usage policies. So policies is a word that Inomial is part of the Inomial billing platform, and that's really got to give you the functionality to react on something happening. So usage is probably one of them. If you simply send a message to something, if something else happens, do something else. All those are cool policies in billing land, in our billing land at least. Payments and collections management, so being able to manage how the customer pays and react if they don't pay, for example. Invoice management and layouts, so how we present those invoices and some of the options you could potentially put there. And finally, dispute management and order to billing integration. So putting those two pieces of the puzzle together so you can order all the way to the bank and invoice and things like that. As mentioned, there's some non-functionals there as well. So 2 million services in operation, a billing run of all those services overnight, and peak API calls of 25,000 an hour. So similarly to the order management one, we'll give you a report for most of those, but obviously the billing run's more, something that you want to see. So we'll show how that can. Great. So yeah, we'll jump to the introduction to Inomial billing. So this is really just to acquaint you to what the platform looks like today. and what the different screens do. And largely, this will be the view that you're building, the people that generate those invoices will see. So I'll hand over to Brian and jump across to the platform. Oh, and just a bit of housekeeping, if we can keep questions to the stuff, the material on the screen, and we'll do Q&A.
A lot of switch out there. Right, so before we go into the POC, I just sort of give you a bit of an idea of what you're looking at and how you navigate around the system at a very high level. So when we go into the POC, you'll get an idea of what I'm actually doing. This is the dashboard view of what's going on in the world of billing at any point in time. It's a high-level whole of business view. It's not about an individual customer. And it's really just metrics around, are there any problems that need to be addressing? Are there any outstanding tickets? Are there any payment problems? How much money is owed to us? And a breakdown you can see there of what the money's for, what services, and how long the debt process is. That's really just like the landing page when you first use the system. Over here, our navigation, we've got like a menu style navigation here where you can switch between the, I suppose for want of better words, subsystems. We've got some are applicable to you, some are not. So for example, the whole ordering side of things will be done via your digital layer. The billing processes itself, I'll just briefly show you. For the sake of the POC, we're going to demonstrate producing an invoice, looking at an invoice, sending an invoice. 100,000 of those things, you're not going to do them one at a time. It's an automated billing process. So I'll just give you a glimpse as to how that works. We've got some help desk functionality, which is possibly not applicable, and the ability to import data from various formats and an analytics capability across the whole of system. Just quickly on the billing process itself, which we won't be showing you, but it really takes you through. It basically goes through the concept of generating the invoices, reviewing and approving the invoices, and then dispatching the invoices. And that can be automatic or it can be interactive, however you choose to operate.
And additional steps can be added into this. So if you guys have steps in between this or extra approvals or certain cases, then it can be added to this. But it's intended that you go step by step here to generate those invoices and dispatch.
Yeah, and the fourth one, I guess I forgot to mention logically, is getting the money, doing the payments process, hitting their bank accounts, credit cards, however you take money. That's not like the whole of business processing side. On the flip side of that, we also have like an individual customer kind of side, which is around the CRM support, account management perspective. If we just drill into any particular customer, we've generally got the information about the customer here, information about their current financial standing up here, and menu items down here to drill into whatever area. And this is the main thing we'll be using for the POC itself. We'll be navigating through some of the various functions on here. So, from memory,
I'll jump back to the PowerPoint.
Oh, you've got the PowerPoint? All right. Let me just find out where PowerPoint's gone. Okay. Do the slideshow.
Slide 7.
That might be a bad idea. It seems to take forever.
Yeah, I don't know why it takes so long to switch out. So where was we up to? We're up to there. So we're now probably, that's probably the...
On the right. Okay, so the first scenario is really about a relatively happy case where a new orders come in. In this case, we've got a broadband order and 2 mobile orders. And you should be able to see that because it's a new customer, that account created with all the customer details. And you should be able to see all those services that they've ordered that are active. In a production sense or in a latter sense, when we do the integration of order management, that activation message will actually come from order management. The first thing that then we can see is we might want to generate an invoice before the actual billing date. So we can receive a request from that from the digital layer or otherwise, and we can generate that PDF. And then through the course of the month, we can do some usage simulations. So step 6, we'll look at some usage, and Mark will send some payloads over that will simulate use 5 gig, 10 gig, etc., etc. And we start hitting those 25, 50, 75% notifications that we need to send off. So we'll do that. And at some point, we would have hit our limits, and we need to send an access request to shape that service. And we can see that update in the platform as well. And then this is where we sort of started to deviate from the POC itself. So the POC talks about on the billing anniversary, everything gets like pushed back to normal, and they're unshaped, etc., etc. We took a look at that, and at first it seemed simple, but we realized once we don't want to really wait here till midnight, and if we change that billing date, it actually starts crunching all your numbers well, it automatically adjusts all your numbers that become quite confusing in a demonstration scenario. So to show you like the auto unshape and updates regarding that. We'll simulate that additional data was purchased. So in this case, just the data add-on. So Mark will send that request. We'll see that the quota is now being lifted again, and we can see that unshaped request out in the network layer. Similarly, when we start wanting to collect the payments, that again is quite difficult because we can't do that. So we've pushed to show you some of those scenarios. We've actually pushed the due date back in history. So what Brian will show you, we'll change the due date, and we'll do that in two steps. One that will simulate that they haven't paid for, I think 11 days is the first one.
Yep.
And we can see that the system reacts to that and shape that service. And then we'll push the due date a bit further back, where I think it's breached 25 days, and we can see that disconnecting request flow through.
Just to be clear, we can absolutely take payments.
Yeah.
But to do it to sort of accelerate the time frame for the purposes of showing it in a 1 hour meeting is not really feasible. So, but we can definitely do payment processing.
And something I'll push down the end. So I guess you'll see usage stats on the UI as part of this demonstration anyway. I've got an optional bit there that we're meant to show that payload. Again, just for the purpose of the demonstration. It doesn't demonstrate very well. I've got a slide at the end that can show you the payload, if anyone's interested there.
Yep.
Any questions around that scenario? No? That looks good. Cool.
Yep.
Right, let's jump into doing it, and then we'll jump back into scenario 2.
Wait the obligatory 5 seconds, 10 seconds. Right, so we'll just start live back at our dashboard that you was familiar with by now. So the scenario started with the digital layer generating a brand new customer with 3 subscriptions and a whole heap of promotional credits. So
Nicholas Simpson.
Nicholas Simpson. So here we basically, I've gone into the main navigation area. You can search for a string, and it basically looks across the system for any logical matches. So he could live in Simpson Street, he might live in Simpsonville, his name might be Simpson Mark or Mark Simpson. Doesn't matter, it could be an invoice number, etc. And we found one match, Mr. Nicholas Simpson. So if we click on Nicholas, we can now see his current state of play. As I mentioned before, this area is the data display area, and down here is the navigation area. We've got information about the account was created, so information such as his name and address, email address, etc. All of that kind of stuff. We've got additional information down here. One of the main bits of information we care about is the plans that the guys signed up for. In this scenario, as you specified, there was an NBN plan and 2 mobile plans on the account. They've been, once again, as per the scenario, they've been auto allocated to the account in an active state. That's just a scenario. They could have gone through transition to that point. They could have been bundled, but this was the scenario that you wanted to see. If we drill down on any one of those plans, we can then see what constitutes the plan, any extras, the cycle around when invoices are issued, and we can then further drill down onto that.
Just point out that in the POC scenarios you wanted to have the billing cycle ending on the 20th, but today's the 20th, so it wouldn't have demonstrated any, it would have just been very confusing. So we just changed it to be the 10th. And Inomial actually works on the basis of the last day of the cycle, which is actually the 9th. So the invoices go out on the 10th, the billing cycle ends at midnight on the 9th, and hence that previous page had shown the 9th there.
If we look at them itself, we've then got some properties around the subscription or the service itself. One of the ones which is of interest here are the allowances, which the NBN gave us. So we can see here that it basically gets 100 gig a month. So from that date to that date, that date to that date, these are the next three. The number which gets shown here and the order, the frequency they get generated is configurable. We've just shown three for the benefits of this demo. And it's basically the way that it works. I mean, allowances get consumed, allowances get renewed. Invoices get generated, recurring allowances get generated to be put on invoices. And those cycles are essentially what constitutes the billing system. The next part of the scenario,
it's probably just worth pointing out, we create allowances in advance so that we don't have to wait for the billing run to complete for the user to get onto their next allowance. So because we've created we've created an allowance for this month, but also an allowance for next month, so that when the clock hits midnight, the allowance is already configured and ready to go. And if there's any changes to the way that the allowance is configured, then we'll cancel these allowances and change it. But we do everything, it's called projection. It's one of the terms of the system. We project the charges, we project the allowances in order to give continuity of service and to make all of the transitions really smooth. Sorry.
Yep. Now I've got the bit of paper to show me the next stage. Oh yeah, cool, thank you. It was all fresh in my head this morning. Okay, so the next part of the stage is the customers phoned up and said, "Hey, I'd like a copy of my invoice, or I'd like my invoice because I want to send it to my landlord to get reimbursed." Was what the scenario asked for. So if we take a look down here, we can then see these are basically the invoices which are going to be produced at some point in time. Once again, we're looking 3 ahead. Just the way it's configured, and if we look at the first one, we can drill down into any of the invoices. So this is the one of interest. We can then see that this invoice will have a 12-month contract credit. That was a $5 a month recurring credit. The 2 mobile services, the broadband service, and then there was a credit for introducing a friend and a credit for the activation delay. So at that point, we can, if in this case they've said, "Hey, can you give me the invoice?" So we'll go through the process of raising that invoice. We can then check that it looks correct. You can see here we've got the GST breakdown, the items, and then if we're all happy with that, we'll then go through the approval process, and the invoice is now in the system. We can take a look at what that invoice would look like. So here is just that. This is just our standard out-of-the-box layout. It can be configured, grouped, differently laid out, different logos, etc. You can see a breakdown of the charges, the payment instructions, pretty common-looking invoice that you'll see on a lot of the government bills you get. That could be emailed to them. It could be made visible via the portal, however you choose to send invoices to your customers.
The colours look like they're pretty close to being right already.
Yeah, I worked hard on that.
And of course, it stores those invoices, so we'll be able to retrieve them historically at a later date.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can either regenerate them, I think we discussed it the other day, but we can either regenerate them on the fly, or we can store the actual rendered PDF and just reuse that. So that's something that we can configure.
Yeah, you get organisations that require it both ways. Sometimes either regen or stored. So there's a pretty neat storage and retrieval microservice that for cataloguing and all the historic artifacts.
Yeah. Mark, did you want to comment on the GST being ex-GST and something like why that's the case?
Yeah, so we do everything ex GST, Inomial, and then we add GST later. So that's why the unbilled charges this thing was $18 for the activation delay and introduce a friend bonus. Actually, we will add the Inc. GST value to that view at some point. We just haven't done that yet. But basically everything is ex GST, and then we use the part of the invoicing processes to actually compute the GST, and that way we know everything there is to know about the invoice. We know all of the dates and times, because GST will change one day, and it has changed in the past, of course. It went from 0 to 10%. So yeah, we take all of that into account.
So the price must be set ex GST.
Yes, correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
So in the bill generation process, you actually click the approve button, right?
Yep.
So what is that actually doing there?
It's basically approving and taking it from I didn't show you, but prior to that stage, it would have shown up as a draft invoice. So the invoice has been generated, but it's not been approved to actually be turned into an invoice, which is due to the account and then optionally sent to the customer.
So I guess that's for like an ad hoc scenario, right, where someone's called up. Whereas there's no limitation if it's part of a normal, auto-generated bill cycle, right?
There is. Behind the scenes, it would move through these. If you was to look at any point of this customer, you would see it move from unbilled to draft to transactions if you got it at the right time. And it does go through those distinct phases, but obviously in bulk.
It's not forcing a button click.
No. I can take you through a bill run. We go through the part, but I can show you the bill run process afterwards.
So you can basically bulk approve the invoices. It really gives you a point in which you can do some analysis before you send them out to say, and the idea is to do that electronically. But basically, it's just so that when you generate an invoice, the very next thing that happens is not the end customer getting an invoice without having at least the ability to check for it.
So it's like a pro forma run that you generate. It's not
a little, except it's actually the final run. So when you do an approval, it's simply flagging that. What actually happens is it generates the invoice. And when you do approval, it puts the invoice onto their account. So until you say approve, the invoice is just sort of literally in a draft state.
So that invoice in that state, it hasn't updated any customer balance.
Not until you approve it, correct?
Okay.
Yes.
And what happens if I want to run another perform? I found a problem.
Cancel it or regenerate it.
So you have to cancel that run?
Or you can just no, not the whole run, just the invoices that you've changed. Okay. So you can. The difficulty is where there's two processes. There's the sort of individual ad hoc process, and there's the formal sort of bulk 2 million invoice process. They all go through the same steps, but if you're just looking at an individual customer, if you reopen this invoice, there should be a regenerate button.
Yep. Let's go back to there.
Yeah,
so now you just see the balance is zero now.
Yeah.
That's not good.
At the bottom, there's a regenerate button. So if you make a change, you can just hit regenerate, and that's going to reprocess that invoice. And it takes about 100 milliseconds. It's very fast.
Okay, so I don't need to have an action to cancel that prior run. I just rerun it.
No, there is an action to cancel it, because if we probably should take this to the end, and I can walk you through it all. Yeah.
So in this case, so we've taken the invoice stuff. I'll just reapprove it. So at that stage, it moves from being a draft transaction to a committed transaction, and the money is now showing up there as due. So that was the first couple of parts of the POC was really around creating the new services and subscriptions and creating the first invoice. So is there any questions to that stage before we move on to the next bit? All right. So the next component was around getting some usage information and then shaping the network based on usage hitting certain limits and sending notifications. So if we take a look at the NBN service itself, if I look down at the usage, we can see there's nothing being consumed right now. The guy's Mark's just watching a few videos, so we just wait for him. He's here. There you go. I've seen this film. It's pretty good, isn't it? He's going to continue watching movies. Who's now used that. All right, we're now up to 70 gig of consumption out of our 100 gig. If we look at that, this shows us that essentially we've now posted a message to the bus saying that this event has occurred. Now something, a subsystem, whether it's one of our subsystems or another subsystem, will take that message and do something with it. It could be send an SMS, it could be send an email, it could be shape them, it could be let the account management know to try and upsell them something, it could be anything.
And the levels, you can set up the level and configuration time.
Correct. So we'll continue using our data. We'll watch another episode.
In the POC, it was about sending these messages to Salesforce.
Yes, because we're using the Salesforce Marketing Cloud as sort of our customer communications channel.
Yep. At this point, we've hit our 75% limit, and I think Mark just used some more, and we've now hit 100%. So if we look in this, we've now got our 100% notification, and we've also removed the policy to enable service. So previously, they had an allowance, and that says, because you've got that allowance, you are allowed to use data. Now you've got no allowance, you're not allowed to use data. We've removed the policy. Which also shows up in here, I think, from memory.
No, there's no policies now.
Yeah, there is no policy. Yeah, sorry, it was before. Yeah, we've removed that policy, and then they basically moved back to the default network operation. That may be shaped, that may be disallowed, that may be carry on as usual. It's totally up to the network.
Yep.
So the next thing what we're going to do is, this scenario here is they're going to phone up and say, "Hey, my internet stopped working." We can look at this and we can say, "Okay, yeah, we can." Yep, you've used all your data, and so you're not going to get anything more until the 9th of September. And they'll say, well, oh God, I'm halfway through a movie, come on. So we're now going to give them some more data, and with how they pay for that data or how that happens would happen in the digital layer probably. And we can now see they've got another allocation of data here for the same time period. So if we look back at they've now got the privilege of using data again. The same in here, it's enabled, and then they just carry on. Same process. If they run out of that before the due date, same thing will happen. If the due date completes, then the next allowance comes into play.
That enabled flag is actually being posted to the network. So it's the result of that message being raised is what we're actually looking at here.
Yeah. And a similar process, I imagine, will happen if we did tick over the next time period.
Exactly, yeah. So the two allowances are basically a but. So one allowance, technically the old allowance ends at the millisecond before the new allowance starts, and so they exactly join, and it'll automatically re-enable as soon as midnight hits in their time zone.
And that, I guess, would be similar for something like non-payment of a bill. Right?
Yes,
Trigger
we're going to come back to correct.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. Yeah. Or even a plan change. Maybe at this time they're going to change to double speed or something. It's just an action policy. Okay, so that was that. So that we've now sort of showed the network usage effectiveness shaping. And the next we're going to come down to the invoice being due scenario. So if we actually look at the invoice here, we can see that it's currently due on the 31st of August. So on the 31st of August, if we had a credit card gateway on here or wherever the payment was going to happen, the payment would occur. If they sent a check in before that, somebody would have received the check into the system and the payment has occurred. What I'm going to do is change this date, and I've got to get the date right now.
I think the 20th. I think I've done it based on the due date.
Based on the 20th. All right, so I'll put it to the 19th.
This is the one thing that I wanted to practice before we...
Yeah. So I'll change the due date of that invoice to say it's now 19th. Now, just one sort of administrative thing here. This is something that somebody could really do. So in this scenario, if somebody changed that due date, but they changed it to August instead of September, the net reflectors will show you it could actually go through and cut them off, which would be pretty disastrous. So because we made a manual change to the detriment of the service, you have to basically go in here and say, I meant to do this. So we'll refresh it.
Maybe it's
Standing?
back long enough.
And maybe I didn't put it back long enough.
It's actually, yeah, if the, well, Brian's adjusting the due date. If we're going to restrict service, it won't do it until midnight. So if we made this change, eventually it will go through, but it basically gives you this grace period to fix up any mistakes that you might have made.
I still didn't like it.
Just,
This was the final change we made just before where we changed the actual date.
we actually thought we were going to
One of these.
We thought we were starting at past, so we thought we'd do one more run before.
Anyway, we will make it happen. There you go. So I've now taken it back far enough so that it's now in a shaped status, so we can show the status of it here as far as the account. So anybody looks at it and goes, this customer's not paid their bill. We can see it here as far as the invoice relates to it. We can also, as we did before, take a look at the subscription itself, etc. Did the plan show us? No, and the plan is still active. We've shaped the service, but the billing is still active. We're still going to bill them in the next month. That hasn't happened yet. We've restricted service, but not billing. The next, we'll just go through and do that again. We'll take it back another month. So they've been shaped and they're still refusing to pay their bill. Possibly not even a customer anymore. And we'll go into, sorry, I've got a screen. And we've now taken the account into a status of disconnected. If we look at the subscription itself, we see it's in the process of disconnecting. So the service is in the process of disconnecting. The account is in a state where we say we've pretty much cut them off from as far as giving them service perspective, and the plan is still active. The billing is still active, because once the service is actually disconnected, that's when we're going to say, okay, we can now no longer bill them, because they still could use the service at this stage in that shape form.
And so all these parameters that we've seen so far, whether it's a threshold of gigabytes of usage or a threshold of amount of time elapsed from an unpaid bill, all that's configurable in the platform. Totally configurable, yeah. And the action which occurs based on it.
So one thing that I actually wanted to lead in with and forgot, what we're showing here, instead of showing payments that failed, so in the POC scenario, it was the first payment fails, the second payment fails, and then the third payment fails. And we shape them, we ban them basically. We don't do it based on payments, we just do it over time. So I think I said before, but we don't care how often or when it gets paid, we just care that it gets paid. And if at the end of, you might have a customer around and say, look, credit cards has been cancelled, I'm going to bring some cash into the office. They probably wouldn't do that, but as long as the invoice is, so we don't really, the payment process isn't what influences this connection, it's the age of the invoice. And we set the due date back in order to simulate time moving forward. But of course, the customer could ring up and say, listen, I need another week to pay. You can just move the due date forward by a week, and that will suspend it. So it's actually, I think, a simpler but also a more accurate reflection of how interactions with customers actually work. So, and hence why we're showing the due date rather than payments.
Do you keep a list of the actions triggered for overdue? Like you had the shaping and then you had the disconnects. Do you have a history of what happened?
Yes.
Yep.
So if you move the date forward, does this customer now move from a disconnected state into a different state? Or?
Yeah, they could, unless the billing has been cancelled.
Well, so yeah, that's an interesting question, because it's simulating like, okay, now you paid. You need to roll back the customer to the normal, right?
Yeah, basically, you'll agree with the customer their due date is now a month away because they've got some hardship or whatever it is. So now they're no longer overdue. They're now got extra month. Does their service now get back unsuspended or reactivated?
Yes. So I hate going off script because show you in a second.
Yeah,
the thing with disconnection is that it tends to be final. So what we would normally suggest is that you wouldn't actually disconnect them on the 25th, you just say we're disconnected. But in actual fact, you probably give it some grace period before you actually unplug it. Yeah, correct. Yep. So a more more real life scenarios that they've been shaped and then they ring up, ask for an extension to payment, we give it to them and it will automatically unshape. Yeah. And that happens if you put the shaping, if you were to change the due date into the future, that will immediately unshape them because that's a positive impact on the customer. So that's sort of how it works. Yeah. Also, if they pay, it would automatically unshape them.
Or you put them on a payment plan.
Or you put them on a payment plan. Yeah.
So we've seen usage details update through this demonstration already. The POC does talk about being able to send that usage up to the digital layer or any other layer. We can show you that JSON. Is anyone interested in that? It's about 4 lines, really. Yeah. Let's just jump to the PowerPoint.
That's in the PowerPoint, is it?
Yeah.
Good. You was making me nervous then.
So just jump to the last slide, Ryan. Yeah.
This is
that's 13, sorry, 13.
This is the order, is it?
Order 13, slide 13. So this is the usage update. Mark knows a lot more about this than me.
Technically, this is a guided and tagged usage update. So basically, at this point, because I was just doing it for the POC, I kind of knew all the numbers in advance, so I plugged them in. But normally, it would contain like a username and a target service ID, a few other things like that. But yeah, it's a pretty simple format that's underlying itself. Cool.
So that pretty much concludes scenario 1, if we've got it right. Anything we go on with scenario 2, or
someone here doesn't agree?
Yeah.
Cover off for Juby.
So apologies. That was the fan.
It's formal, but
Actually, it's probably worth saying that slide 13. You'll notice there's no source or destination information in here, and I didn't actually get time to add that. So in the next scenario, we'll show you the usage data. This is the file that would have the source and destination fields in it that I haven't in, so they're just going to be so you'll see that in a minute.
I guess another call out maybe was understood, but while we were showing a lot of the usage, so the interaction with the platform from the native user interface and all of that's out of the box and what an agent might do, you've also been alluding to hey, customers might be there on digital. They'll still be able to access the same data. It would be a technical integration, you built around to do that. But largely, of course, the customer will be able to log into self-service and access the same data that they see there, like what their billing details are, when they're due, initiate payments, view their usage, all that.
So Mark can probably talk more against this, but all this data is exposable out to whatever system you want. We've just found, I guess, over our lifetime of demonstrations, jumping and showing them JSON and or whatever payloads are like 9 money. So we try to avoid it where possible.
I've actually got the query here for afterwards. If you
but yeah, we do have those deeper architectural sessions where we can dive into some things. Cool.
Okay, so scenario 2.
So scenario 2, the billing challenges. So this is more around, I guess, an existing customer and how they might interact with you, and then some problems that might arise. So we'll start off with we'll create a new customer, but we'll simulate for the purpose of this that they're existing and they've got a month, just tapping away in the background. So this customer at some point decides that I want an additional mobile service. So we'll add that in, and again, we'll see that activated and added onto their account.
So my good friend Carl Skinner has just asked.
We won't do that yet.
You want to go through
Yeah. And then Carl Skinner is heading overseas, so they purchased some international roaming pack as well. At some point in the future, they might also request that they get some of that billing information, and we can see that again. So then Carl actually heads overseas and makes some phone calls, and so there's some international usage updates will come through, and then those notifications are available as well. Okay, and then we're moving on, and at some point Carl actually receives his bill. So the billing anniversary hits, an invoice comes out, and Carl reads his bill. So the scenario that we're given was Carl looks at it, sees some itemized charges for each call he made, overseas, and that wasn't what he understood he purchased. So he raises a dispute. The dispute is resolved, I guess, according to your business process, in Carl's favour, and we can apply that credit. For the purpose of this, I guess we've simulated that your resolution process lies in your CRM. So we'll simulate a credit coming in. It's been resolved in Carl's favour. There's a credit for X dollars, I can't remember the amount, and we'll be able to regenerate that invoice and see that that credit's been applied. Does that make sense so far? Cool. Right. Take it away.
Get back to it. Okay, so we'll go back to our search bar and we'll look for Carl with a C or a K.
Let's see.
See? Oh, there's too many.
There's
Skinner.
a lot of Carltons in there.
There he is.
Yep, so there's Carl Skinner. So we can see that at the moment, Carl has a bundle. So we introduced the concept of a bundle here, and if we're looking at that bundle is made up of an NBN service and a mobile service. So as per the POC, now Carl's going to phone up and he's going to request another mobile service. So mark the digital layer. I've got to refresh that. Right? Oh, there you go. Mark the digital layer has created another mobile service under the account. That could just have easily been under the bundle, but we've shown it at the account level for the sake of this. If we drill into that as before, we can see the details of the plan and then the details of the mobile service itself, including the data allowance, which it has. It's got a 15 gig data allowance, and it's also got a call making allowance because it's a mobile phone. Now with the scenarios, so now the guy is basically what is saying, he's phoning up and say, I'm going overseas and I want to get a 20-day pass at $5 a day. Was the scenario. And he's probably done that while I've been talking.
No,
He hasn't? Okay.
I think we wanted to raise the first.
Oh, yeah. This is the same thing. So so this is the initial invoice that went out. I'll just raise that so that it gets out the way. If we then look at the next invoice,
so
there's nothing on there at this stage.
I'll add the rating. So this is like adding a bolt-on or what we call plan extra. That's done.
Yep, that's done. So if we look, that will show up in the plan as well.
Correct. Yeah.
So if we go back and take a look at the plans, there's this mobile plan that I showed you before. If we're looking at that, he's now got an international roaming extra added onto that plan. And if we go back down to the invoice itself, was it that one? What's it? 9 for the 8th.
What's going on there?
Did I pick the wrong one?
It must be the 9th of the 9th.
Sorry?
Must be the 9th of the 9th one.
9th of the 9th.
Something changed in between those.
Yeah.
There it is.
Yep. So sorry. So we can see on here we've now got our $100 charge, which will go out on the next invoice for the time he's going to be away. Now that could have equally been added on a day-by-day basis. We've added it here for the 20 days. And now he's overseas, and Mark's just going to shoot off to Spain and make some phone calls for us.
If you just click the reload button, I think it caches it.
There you go. You just made a call to Toronto. Oh, and he's now phoned Nice. You're going to make any more phone calls? Or?
Yeah, I'm making a phone call. Got 6 seconds to go through. Maybe I can go through. Maybe I put the same one through twice.
I guess, of course, also the when we do this for real, there'll be a system that's providing these CDR data. We have a couple of different sources. In mobile, it's WME. For fixed, it's can't remember the name of it, it's another system. And so they want to build that as a technical integration, so they'll show up here, which is what you're simulating basically.
Yeah, and it can happen in different ways. It can come via a flat file. It can come via the messaging layer. It could come via a protocol like Camel or Diameter, depending on the type of network and the type of integration. So we've got a few phone calls here now. And the guy is happily overseas, and the next stage, we was then going to send the guy an invoice. So if we look at the invoice now, we can see we've actually got the phone calls itemized on the invoice.
Yeah, we're
That
not
means
formatting that very well. It's
seconds.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
Do you guys convert that into some units?
Yeah, typically we do. We just haven't.
Okay, no, that's fine. So it's not up to the source to say, oh, it's 60 seconds is 1 minute. You guys.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we do all of that. Yeah.
Yeah, and we can also rate it. They may be pre-rated, or we may rate it. We may do it as a wholesale markup. We may say it's a 10-cent flag full and 2 cents per minute blocked in 30-second increments, etc., based on this type of
You can apply
destination.
rules to that quantity.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's basically
On top of the, I was going to ask something similar. If you can process not just the rate, but apply the, like you guys said, or markup on some specific rules on a pre-priced.
Yeah, it can be.
Pre-rated,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah, it can be on a markup, or it can actually be rated based on how you choose to charge for international calls.
We can also do like minimums and like divisors, so you can, or like what do we call it?
Flag fault.
There's flagfall and intervals, so you can charge whole minutes or half minutes or every 10 seconds.
It's the units.
Mm.
Like you have the measure units and the rated unit. Like you have every 6 seconds,
Correct.
like a pulse.
Yeah, 5 cents a minute, or
Yeah.
10
Or
cents
5.
for 30 seconds, and
Yep, exactly.
the first 2 minutes are free.
Okay.
Okay, so we'll go. I think that was the next step. We're going to go ahead, and that invoice was created, whether I pushed a button or it happened as part of the billing run. We'll approve it. We can see here the same information. We'll approve the invoice, and then whatever his name was, Carl, opens up his post or his email and sees his telephone bill. When he looks at these charging, he goes, "What the hell? I've paid my $5 a day. Why the hell are you charging me for these phone calls?" So he then, in this scenario, phones up customer care, and they basically will say, "Okay, we understand the misunderstanding. I've got to go and get the approval, or I've got to talk to my manager. I'll get back to you in 5 days," whatever the business process states. Let's just refresh the screen.
I haven't done it yet. So what I'm going to do here is the scenario wanted the capability to produce a dispute just for the values of the telephone charges and nothing else. So that's not an out-of-the-box thing. So I just wrote a little script to do it, and I just did it in half an hour this morning. It's pretty easy. And there's really 2 parts to this. There's I wanted to demonstrate our ability to create an itemised credit that lists the things that have been credited and to take that off the amount that we're charging on the invoice. The other part of it is what's the workflow that this credit is going to go through, and we haven't tried to address that in the POC. So I'll create that credit now, and I need to get the invoice number right apparently. 214
31556.
314 315. Too many 5s exception. Okay, and if you reload it now. So we've got this credit, and if you open up the credit, you can see it's got the original calls, Toronto, Frankfurt, Torrevieja, and this. And if you go back to the transaction listing, you can see that the unallocated amount on the original invoice has now gone down to $198. Now, people who have got sharp eyes will notice that the account balance has gone down to minus $31. The reason for this is because we're in a POC and we're generating invoices in advance, and we never set the invoice date. So the invoice date is actually dated in September, which means that it's not going to show up on the account balance until September. So we don't display forward dated things, but the credit, unfortunately, I didn't think about this and I credited it for today. So that it will all add up in the end. But basically, we've demonstrated here that we can issue a credit for any of the line items on the invoice. And in a production system, we could actually make that word credit say dispute credit, and we could create a workflow around this, presumably in the Telflow or digital layer.
Similarly, the guy could have paid the invoice before he realised. He might have direct debited it, and then he looked at the email and go, "Hold on, this is wrong." In which case, that would show as a credit on the account still, but it would be unallocated because we got no. And then the next invoice it would allocate to. And that's pretty much the scenario for 2, as far as what was stated.
Questions? Thoughts? Queries?
So that was pretty good. One thing maybe just sort of for this audience is that as a POC, obviously this is showing optionality, shows what the platform can do. We're not necessarily exercising all of that in if we were to go and do this for real. For example, like, the exact way that we model international roaming may or may not be how we do it, when we introduce that product. But this shows us that, obviously you can do racing and we have that choice too. And one thing that was good to see here also is that, there are certain limitations in our current implementation that clearly here are sort of, out of the box. And one of those examples might be the ability to have multiple services for one customer. So it seems like a silly limitation, but we have that today. So it's good to see that, hopefully shouldn't have any limitations going forward in that regard. And then similarly, even for like the bundling. At the moment, we don't do any bundling. We're not sure if we will necessarily do that tomorrow, but we have that option. It's got, the construct where presumably it's just, configuration for us to be able to set that up. I guess one thing is for belong, it's hard to tell, what, will become a requirement, in the future, but it's good to know that, there's certain flexibility in the platform that will enable us.
They are requirements.
Yeah. But at the same time, we don't necessarily have like all those product constructs yet. But yes.
I guess we're just trying to show as real a situation as possible, and there is much optionality as possible. So it starts, thinking in your mind how you could actually apply this to where you want to take your business. And there's probably a lot more that Mark can talk about that I've tried to rein in. But certainly, I think there's another discussion next week. And go to the scenario. So if you do have any questions, feel free to grab us. Hopefully you'll know where we're sitting at this point in time. Feel free to grab us or shoot me. Great.
Yeah, I actually enjoyed the POC because one of the things I wanted to do is have that sort of the original plan pricing included in the bundle and then apply a discount for the bundling. And I hadn't actually, that wasn't how I intended it when I designed the system, but I thought I'd just give it a quick go and see if I could do it. And it was easy. I was really happy. So it actually presents on the invoice differently to how I'd envisaged it, but it was flexible enough that it was not a stretch. I wasn't doing anything wrong. I just was doing something I hadn't thought of before. So those bundles where you've got mobile and broadband and you stick them together, the discount is actually a negative recurring charge, and it just worked. Got prorated and everything. So I was really happy with that. And it allows you to construct and deconstruct bundles really easily.
Right. So I guess I only got one slide left, so like last time, we just jump back to the slide background, please. If just on slide 10. So again, I haven't written these up yet, but I'll provide some instructions that you guys and some login details that you guys can log in and have a browse around yourself. Any questions, just hit me up. And feel free to have a play. I'll do that in the next couple of days. And I guess that's it for the presentation.